Welcome into the Rockies Insider Podcast. I'm your insider, Patrick Lyons, and joining me today to get us ready for a nice 3-game set with the New York Metropolitans, we've got Ryan Finkelstein from Locked On Mets and from Just Baseball, naturally. Ryan, how you doing today, bud?
I'm doing good. Doing really good. Sad I can't go out there to Denver to check out this series, but should be a lot of fun.
Coors Field, one of the best spots to watch a game easily. I don't know if the 7-Line Army is going to be coming out. I know they did once in the last couple years. They made a big pilgrimage to come out to Denver.
I think that would probably be a no then. I think they're slowly making their way across all 30 stadiums. So if they've been to Denver recently, I don't think that we'll see them out there. But Mets fans have been traveling pretty well. There was a lot in Anaheim this weekend, so
Very true. Very true. Yeah, we'll get to what's going on this weekend because Mets are flying all over the place. Maybe the Rockies can actually take advantage of that in this 3-game set. Love talking with you here. I wish we were talking about Gunnar Henderson and Bobby Witt to a degree. I mean, that's what we do on the Who's Better Baseball podcast. Shameless plug for from our other projects. But we're here to talk Mets. We're here to talk Rockies. And for anyone that might not know, I do want to ask, how the heck did the Mets get themselves at the top and the front of the NL wildcard standings? But I want to talk about José Iglesias to start with. Can you explain for Rockies fans who got to experience him a little bit in 2022 before the Ezekiel Tovar era began? He was a guy that just filled the spot for a year after Trevor Story was gone, very much a transitional year. And it seems like 2023 and 2024 is also transitional years, but there's not as many transitional players quite like José Iglesias. How did this come about with him becoming this pop star and this maybe clubhouse MVP, fan
yeah.
favorite? I don't know how you would call it, but get us through the timeline just a little bit on former Rocky, current Met, José Iglesias.
Well, Jose Iglesias had a good spring, and so there was some thoughts of maybe he'll break camp, but the Mets, they had signed Joey Wendell for a couple $1 million, so he got that inside track to get the first crack at that backup utility infielder role. Didn't go well. The Mets at one point went with both Brett Baty and Mark Vientos on the roster, which made them pretty thin when it came to a backup utility infielder. And eventually, Mark Vientos won that job. They send Brett Baty down, and Iglesias was the natural guy to come up to back up second, short, third. That's all we really thought it was going to be, just a backup utility infielder. But in a series that started this great run for the Mets against the Nationals, I was actually in D.C. for it, there was 3 lefty starters, and Jeff McNeil has not been playing well this season. So they went with Jose Iglesias for all of those games, and he was unbelievable. And ever since, he has been unbelievable. I don't know if the hot hitting is going to continue, but after every win the Mets have, they play his song OMG in the clubhouse. Yes, my lights are freaking out, but they play OMG in the clubhouse, and it's clearly become a rallying cry. And he is just a great member of this team right now. Their great run the last 2 months has coincided with his arrival. So call him a lucky rabbit's foot or whatever it is, but his production has actually been there along with the good vibes.
The Mets have definitely been enjoying his presence in that way and having fun. On the flip side, OMG was played in the Rockies clubhouse once in the last few homestands, and there were some folks that were not too happy. They're like, "Yeah, I've heard this song already. I'm kind of done with it." So Iglesias manages to make his way to the All-Star game because of his singing, not his middle infield play. But this lineup is super deep. Looking at it 1 through 9. Whether you've got Tyrone Taylor in center or Harrison Bader in center field, Iglesias not even making that 1 through 9 lineup. It's super deep, and it seems like the Mets are really just getting production from a little bit of everybody. Nimmo, Lindor, and Alonso, they're at the top of the leaders. Both Nimmo and Lindor might surprise people, are battling for most RBI. You would think Alonso is there. He's there with Lindor on the home runs. But probably the 2 surprising players for the Mets on the offensive side, we touched on Iglesias, but also Mark Vientos, right? Leading the team in OPS. I think he's a player that is going to go under the radar for anyone going out to these ball games at Coors Field over the next 3 days. Sure, Alonso, Lindor, Brandon Nimmo. He's a Wyoming product. Rockies were linked with him just a little bit in free agency, but Mark Vientos should be the guy I think a lot of people keep their eye on, right?
Yeah, he's been a lot of fun to watch. And particularly to me, this was always a bat first prospect. We were always wondering, all right, is there going to be a DH spot open for him? When JD Martinez got signed, it was like, all right, I guess Vientos might not have any, pathway to the big leagues this year. Because Brett Beatty struggled offensively, Mark Vientos got an opportunity. And not only does he thrive with the bat, he's been pretty solid with the glove. Now, we'll see late in games. José Iglesias will probably go out there for the last couple innings. But Mark Vientos offensively has been in a lot of ways like the Mets' best hitter. If you look at WRC plus OPS, like you mentioned, he's at 16 home runs and I think a little over 60 games. So he's really been a great source of power. And I believe in OPS, he might be behind only like Rafi Devers or something at the third base position. If you set it by however many plate appearances he's at, 200 or whatever it is. So yeah, Vientos has been a real surprise, a huge lift to this team. That was another big component that came in that coincided with this run, was getting Vientos at third base every day.
Yeah, he's sort of the Mets version of Michael Toglia for Rockies fans saying, oh my gosh, this guy is, right on 20 home runs and he hasn't really played very much. Toglia, you talk about, hitting for power. I think going into their last series against the Padres, Michael Toglia for players with a certain minimum of at-bats or games played, third highest at-bats to home run ratio. So dude's hitting home runs in a similar capacity to Mark Vientos. Now, as I said, the lineup is super deep, and so I think the Mets are certainly benefiting from that. You talked about how good Jeff McNeil has not been all year long, and he's been one of their best players since the trade deadline, since of course the All-Star game break in general. From the Mets perspective, do they seem like a team that they're going to get contributions from just about everybody in the lineup on a given night? You just don't know who it is, and that's really what makes them so deadly here in this wild card race?
Absolutely. I think that's been the big thing. You look at the stats since June, they've had the best offense in baseball by WRC plus, and they're top 5 in home runs scored. They've been really solid. And it is that, kitchen sink approach with so many guys that can come and get you. Jeff McNeil has been a great, great surprise because like I mentioned, really rough year. He was getting close to just being relegated to a bench role. And 4 days of a break just seemed to do wonders for him. So many times Mets fans get on this guy about him playing golf and how that ruined his swing because he's an avid golfer. That they blame that. And the funny thing is, what happened, what got him on track? 4 days of playing golf and an all-star break to clear his head. And the guy comes back, and it's just the at-bats are so much better. They talked about him guiding the baseball before the break and how now he's just really impacting the ball, just hitting it hard, wherever it's pitched. And all of a sudden he's hitting home runs. He's driving the ball into gaps. It's been an incredible turnaround. And now all of a sudden he is one of their best players again. And you can play him at right, left, second. So his versatility is always something that's really critical. But when he's hitting, that versatility can really shine through. He's not hitting, it's not as valuable.
When I thought about the discussion about Jeff McNeil, I thought, okay, so he ends up staying put at the deadline as could have been one of those major league chips where, all right, a big leaguer for another big leaguer. We saw so many teams do that at the deadline. And I said, well, he didn't stay put so much as he was stuck in Queens, right? He's kind of stuck there, and Mets are stuck with him as well, but it's definitely been positive. Now, let's jump to the starting pitching. Now, the Mets rotation, they don't have the same household names that I think a lot of people would realize, right? They don't have the DeGrom, they don't have the Harvey, they don't have the Syndergaard. I know in New York, maybe Steven Matz deserves to be in that conversation. I don't think so. I don't think I'm really leaving anyone out. I think those were the big 3 names that everyone knew. Instead, it's really just been a few journeymans with bounce back seasons that have really made for one of the best starting rotations in the game.
Yeah, they've been very just solid. It's kind of a collection of 3s and 4s, but you know what? If all of them are doing their thing, it's fine. Lately Luis Severino has maybe been the best, but then at times he'll have a clunker like his last one out where he gave up a lot of runs. I'm sure he's going to pitch in this upcoming series, so it'd be good to see him try to get back on track. Sean Manaea is the guy that at times has had the best stuff. His last outing, 7 strong innings, I think 11 strikeouts. So he's been really solid at times. Quintana, another guy that's just veteran who can come through and be strong. David Peterson has had a very nice season after getting off-season hip surgery. So they figured out a way to patch it together, and Paul Blackburn looked great in his first Mets start, the guy they picked up at the deadline. filling right in as another guy that's probably on a great team of 5, but on this team, just another one of these guys that you're just hoping can go out there, give you a quality start. So they've found a way to patch that together. And really, it's the bullpen that's been more of an issue than the rotation this year, which I think when you look at the names on paper, that's probably a little bit of a surprise.
Is there anything to what the Mets are doing with these guys, or is it just these are mainly veteran pitchers? Other than some of the younger ones, Jose Budo, Peterson, as you mentioned, we'll talk about here in a second. But in general, have they found something magical there in Flushing that they can somehow replicate where they don't need to have a Kodai Senga, which they certainly would love to have, and that's unfortunate. Another setback for him, but they don't need to go out and get more Max Scherzers and Justin Verlanders. Have they put their finger on anything in particular that says, hey, you know what? We've got a strong pitching coach and staff in general that we can replicate this season in, season out?
I think if you look at David Stern's past with the Brewers, I would say that depth and defense are a couple of the things that he's prioritized this year. Just getting a lot of options, the cycle arms, particularly in the bullpen, but even in the rotations, having a lot of options. And we sort of saw the blueprint in the offseason when they go out and they sign Harrison Bader. He trades for one of his former players in Tyrone Taylor, two really good defensive outfielders. You have up the middle right now, Lindor and Iglesias or McNeil. He's a really strong defense there. And the other thing I think the Mets have to their advantage right now is their catchers are really strong, particularly Francisco Alvarez. He is beyond his years when it comes to leadership. And you see splits with a lot of these guys, Quintana and Minaya in particular, where when they have Francisco Alvarez behind the plate, the ERA is a couple runs less than when there's any other catcher. So I think his leadership is really huge. Paul Blackburn, like I said, made his first start the other day. He came out of it when he was talking to the media just raving about Francisco Alvarez. So it was unbelievable to throw to him, just really trust him right away. Did a great job getting to know him and figure out what works for him. So I think Alvarez is that other little secret sauce, kind of similar to what Adley Rutschman does with the Orioles. Geez, I combined Orioles and Oilers there. But when you have a really good defensive catcher that can kind of lead your pitching staff, you might be able to get a little bit more out of it than otherwise.
I'm glad you mentioned Alvarez too, because Vientos is going to be that guy that you might be surprised by. But if I think there's any one player to really watch during this series, other than Francisco Lindor, who I don't think the numbers really tell that whole story. And I know how valuable he's been to this franchise and to this team this year, and probably puts him as being most valuable on the 2024 Mets. But it's Francisco Alvarez. If you're going to watch him, when there's a catcher that is somewhat of a quiet leader, that has so much value to a team. I remember watching an entire 4-game set with JT Realmuto in either 21 or 22 and just thought, this guy does everything. He's stealing bases. He's grabbing, an extra base, if the outfielder's not hitting the cutoff, whatever it is, just doing so many little things incredibly well. And it just became a pleasure to watch. And I think Alvarez is that guy for the Mets, where if you just want to watch one player and just keep your eye on and enjoy the craft, both on the hitting side and on defense, I think Francisco Alvarez is that player for the Mets.
Francisco Alvarez, he loves baseball. And I know that sounds like, oh, don't all players love baseball, but that's not necessarily the case. And Alvarez in particular, clearly a baseball junkie. To see how he was itching to get back when he was hurt this year. And he played with a splint on his hand for the first couple of weeks after he did come back. This is a kid that just really puts a lot into it. We see in the offseason, he works really hard in his game, throwing medicine balls, trying to mimic that third on a second base so he can get better in that part of his game, to just, continuing to get better offensively. We've seen a much better approach in the box this year. So Francisco Alvarez is really the future of the New York Mets. He's the guy that you look at and say, if they're going to be good for a long time, it's because they have him as their starting catcher. So I can't say enough good things about him. And I've said it before, but I think it's a good antidote to mention. I noticed this when he was a prospect. He has the best tattooed on his neck, right across his throat, the best in red ink. And I think that just kind of sets the tone of who he is and what he strives to be. I would not be surprised at all if in a couple of years we are calling him the best catcher in baseball. I really think he has that high of a ceiling.
Still only 22 years old. So a couple of months younger than Ezekiel Tovar. We know how great he's been in Colorado. I was thinking about, I wanted to ask you, whose stock you would rather have going forward, Brandon Nimmo versus Brenton Doyle. And then it got me thinking that, well, wait a minute, because the Rockies didn't sign Brandon Nimmo, that opened up a place in center field for Brenton Doyle. And so that worked out. And it reminded me of another Met player, Jose Reyes, when he got traded to the Rockies in 2015. Domestic violence business, boom, he is on the restricted list, opens up a door for Trevor Story. So again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, this the 3-game matchup, the proposed possible starters that we're going to see today on Tuesday: Kyle Freeland against Luis Severino. On Wednesday, Ryan Feltner versus Paul Blackburn in his second start since coming over from the A's. And on Thursday, Austin Gomber against David Peterson in his Coors Field debut. Peterson, a Regis Jesuit high school graduate from Aurora, 20th overall pick in 2017 for the Mets. Rockies loved him, but they didn't have a pick until the second round. Pick overall number 48 for Ryan Valade. That was because they had signed Ian Desmond after he received a qualifying offer from Texas. So they lost the 11th overall pick, which ended up becoming Jake Berger. Shane Baz, Trevor Rogers went the next 2 picks after that. But David Peterson, been around for a while, and he's finally coming into his own. He's got himself a much more healthy season this year. Coming back to Denver, one of those Colorado kids. I'm excited to see him start at Coors Field, and I wouldn't be as scared, I think, as probably a lot of Mets fans would be. Anytime you go into Coors Field, it's going to be wacky. Might not be so bad for the Denver product and David Peterson.
Yeah, I imagine he's probably used to it from his youth a little bit. And David Peterson's a guy that I loved, have loved throughout his entire time coming up. 2022, I thought he really turned the corner. And I was talking about going into last year, I felt like he could be a number 3 starter as soon as the 2023 season. And it was a brutal year for him. But then we found out after he was pitching through this hip injury and he was compensating. He felt like he could pitch through it, but he got the surgery and he had been talking about how much better his body felt this year. And we're seeing it. I mean, this guy has a lot of talent. He was a first-round pick. And so you see, that shine through with these guys once they start to figure it out. Really has been a quality starter for the Mets. So he's not necessarily a guy that I'd expect to be much more than a 3 in his big league career, but a solid pitcher who can go out there and give you 6 strong innings. So I'm excited to see what he does at altitude.
Late innings are not fun for the opposing team in the third base dugout or first base dugout. Let's be honest. So Mets bullpen, give me the skinny on how you feel about these next 3 days. Who are you most comfortable with coming in, and who do you think could make it really interesting for a Rockies comeback?
Jose Budo has all of a sudden been the guy I'm most comfortable in, which is crazy because he was a starting pitcher earlier this season, did well in that role. When the Mets were just floundering in the bullpen, they decided, all right, let's just get the best possible arm in here. And he's been a revelation. So Jose Budo is one of those guys. He's pitching maybe once every 3 to 4 days because he's a former starter. They're giving him rest, and then he's getting bulk innings. So there's some games where you might say, all right, you get the starter through 5 with the lead. Now you go to Jose Budo and try to bridge the gap to Edwin Diaz. Edwin Diaz being the other guy I trust right now. Outside of those two, it is, anyone's guess what the Mets are going to get from their bullpen. Phil Maton has been pretty solid coming over in an earlier July trade. We're still trying to see the returns of Ryan Stanek, Huascar Brazaban, who got brought in at the deadline, who had a rough outing on Saturday night. But the Mets are really looking for answers. I think the interesting thing is going to be what happens coming off the IL. The Mets might get Reed Garrett back at some point this week. Same thing with Sean Reed-Foley. Those guys had really good seasons prior to injury. So if they can come back, that'll shore up a bullpen that definitely needs some help.
Yeah, Rockies have an opportunity to play spoiler. It's really what they're going to be doing for the final 2 months. It's what they've been doing for the final 2 months of the last 4 seasons, right? Because they're out of it pretty early. Now, in general, the Mets, you can't sweep a series. We know that, but Mets are in an interesting part of their season right now. That's why they're coming into Coors. They're battling for a wild card spot, but just in general, they've got one of the easier schedules, 7th easiest, I believe, the rest of their way. And the next 2 weeks is really pivotal for them. They got 3 in Colorado, then they go to Seattle, then at home, Oakland and Miami before the Orioles come to Queens. So they've got it a lot easier than the Rockies, who already with one of the worst records in the game, 4th hardest schedule. Baltimore's coming to Coors Field later on this month. They still got Yankees, 6 with the Dodgers, Milwaukee, Atlanta. It's kind of rough. So this will be an interesting series, especially with the Mets going from Anaheim to St. Louis for one game, then swinging over to Denver. So it could get a little bit weird and wild in this series as it typically does. Ryan, I want to get your an outside opinion. I don't know if this is going to be an official segment or not. I think it will be. It should be. Where I ask people that cover other teams, what's the view? What from the outside looking in on all things Rockies and in Colorado, in Denver. So we just had the MLB trade deadline. What were your thoughts on how well the Rockies did? Obviously, don't know all the inner workings, and you could say, well, this guy was hurt, so you couldn't have gotten the same return for him. What should you do in general? What are your thoughts for the last place Rockies and what they were able to do at the deadline?
I think I'm always someone that doesn't like to watch teams sort of hang in the middle and not do too much in either direction. And the Rockies are perpetually that team. I just think Cal Quantrill in particular, if that alone, if you want to talk about other guys, I mean, anyone who was a rental should have been out the door anyway. But just in particular, like I understand the Ryan McMahon decision, right? Like while I think they probably could have got a ton for him, I get saying we need guys that are going to sell tickets and guys that we can build around, and he's under contract. I understand that one. Cal Quantrill has, from my understanding, already made it clear he's not going to sign an extension. You have him for a year and a half. This was the time to capitalize on his market and get a lot of value in return. That was the big miss, I think, for the Rockies. Other ones don't stand as much, but I feel like when you see what Trevor Rogers got from the Orioles, to the Marlins to get two guys, Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers, who are going to be sliding into their lineup immediately, basically. I imagine that Norby would have been a nice piece because you can play him pretty much anywhere. I feel like that type of return could have been there for Cal Quantrill, if not better. So that was the one big miss, I would say, at the deadline.
Middling in the mountains. That's a good way of putting it, right? Hanging around in the middle. All right, before we get out of here, Mets, Rockies crossover. So I'm going to name some players that have spent time with both the Mets and the Rockies. You tell me if this guy is a Met or a Rocky. So you're either claiming this guy or you're gonna try to push him over to the Rockies side of the world. This might go from easy to harder, but first one up, and again, Rockies fans are going to have a nice laugh. Daniel Murphy, Met or Rocky?
Met. Definitely a Met.
And we know because, of course, 2015 World Series. I mean, we know what year Daniel Murphy was super hot. It was 2015 for the Mets. Yep. Yeah, 2 years in Colorado, one of which was abbreviated because of the pandemic, and no fans were even there. He did almost get taken out by a tooth. Colorado does not in his mouth, but by a person in a tooth costume, because Colorado doesn't have anything, a fun race like they do in Washington. They do the presidents. In San Diego, it's Anchorman. They should do something with dinosaurs in race. No, they had some kind of promotion where it was a tooth, a toothbrush, and a tube of toothpaste running, and Daniel Murphy stepped out, and they were zooming by. I think he did it intentionally. He's got an interesting sense of humor. So he escaped harm there pretty good. All right. Mike Hampton. Now, he's pitched more innings with the Rockies than the Mets. What are your thoughts?
I think because of the school system, we'll give him to the Rockies.
And here, this is where a lot of Rockies fans are probably going to push back and go, come on, that was a good little run that he was when he was with the Mets. You push him there. Yeah, this one might be somewhat of a split decision, but definitely had a lot more time with Colorado. Made some good memories. I think people only just remember how big the contract was and the fact that they had to give up Juan Pierre in that deal to get rid of that money. But, still did a couple good things, made the All-Star team with the Rockies there in that first season in 2001. So probably a little bit better than people think. Jay Payton and Jeremy Burnitz, you can't have them both.
I'll take Jay Payton. Jeremy Burnitz was a disappointing man. I'll tell you that much. That was an offseason, if I remember correctly. This is early in my youth, but they got Roberto Alomar, Jeremy Burnitz, and Mo Vaughn. And yeah, all of them, I think, flopped.
I mean, you got to give a pass to Burnitz. I mean, he's the only one who's not like the MVP Hall of Fame kind of candidate. So he should get a little bit of a pass. But yeah, drafted by the Mets, developed by the Metropolitans, and had a sneaky good season, got MVP votes in his big year with Colorado, 37 home runs. So, okay, Jeremy Burnitz for the Rockies. We'll take that one. Jerry Dipoto. Yes, that Jerry DiPoto, GM of the Mariners. You
I
going
give.
Mets? Or you going Rockies?
I honestly don't even remember him as a Met. I don't even remember hearing that. So I'll give him to the Rockies.
Yeah, he did pitch. He pitched a little bit more with Colorado. So okay, I think that one's right. This one will be interesting. Kaz Matsui, Met, Rocky.
Did he have some good years in Colorado? He was only good for the first game with the Mets, and then the first game opening, he's one of the greatest opening day players in MLB history, and then he fell off a cliff. There was a point in time where the Mets moved Jose Reyes off of shortstop for Kaz Matsui because that's how big of a signing he was, and that did not last long. I'd give him to the Rockies.
Okay, good, because Rockies fans would have fought you over that one. Critical in 2007 for the run to Rocktober and getting to the World Series. So his time with Colorado was very short, but it was a great one. And then finally, Omar Quintanilla. He's a Rocky.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, how about Jose Reyes? And look, don't give him. He's not a Rocky. You have to take Jose Reyes.
Oh, of
I
course,
think
of
you'd be happy
course.
with that, though. You're happy with that.
I mean, it's so weird because Jose Reyes is one of my favorite players, and then now it's like you can't really go out and say it because of what happened. But yeah, Jose. The crazy part was, I remember going. I guess what year was that? 2016 he came over, and I went to a game at City Field, and I mean the crowd still loved Jose, and it was sort of an awkward thing to view. It's like, okay, I mean, I guess we're all cheering for him, or the chants are still there. But yeah, that was an awkward second stint with the Mets, but certainly a Met more than any other team. Jose Reyes for sure.
100%. Yeah, I think Marlins fans would also say, no, he's a Met. Blue Jays fans, he's a Met for sure.
You did forget one.
Oh, okay. So he played with 5 teams?
No. I'm not talking about teams. I'm about a player that played for
Oh, okay.
both. Michael
Oh,
Kadire.
yeah. Oh, you do. Mets fans don't want Kadire.
No, I don't,
He's
because
got Cuddy.
the Mets signed Kadire off of a Coors Field season, and then he
Yes.
retired after 2015 with the Mets, where he was nowhere near as good. But yeah, I do remember that one because it was from Rockies to Mets.
And Rockies gave him a qualifying offer. He rejected it. So when the Mets signed him, they lost
Yeah,
the pick. So
yeah.
that was almost an Ian Desmond type situation again.
I wonder
Kadire,
who
yeah.
that pick was. I wonder who it was.
That sounds like some good fodder for Locked On Mets. That's where you can listen to Ryan many, many days a week. Go ahead and plug away so folks can know where to get not just your Mets content, but baseball content in general.
Yeah, Locked On Mets. I do all 7 days a week during the season, so you can find that wherever you get your podcasts. And then check out all the writing we have over at justbaseball.com. You can follow me on Twitter or X at Finkelstein Ryan.
Yeah, great follow. Make sure you're doing that. At Patrick D. Lyons for me on Twitter. At Rockies_insider. Also Twitter, X. Ryan, appreciate you joining me. I'm still working on the sign-off. I'm workshopping a couple things. So tune in tomorrow where you might get a sign-off. Thanks for joining me.